Hi, I'm Nadine, and this is the story of how a hidden envelope on a summer afternoon changed everything I thought I knew about family, fairness, and who we choose to become when no one's watching. For years, I paid the bills, covered the taxes, and kept the peace, because that's what the responsible one does. But the day I found out my mother gave my college fund to my brother without telling me, I stopped being silent. Before we go any further, tell me, have you ever felt like an outsider in your own family? If yes, comment number 1. If no, comment number 0. This is a family drama you don't want to miss. They always said the money was never there. But that warm August afternoon proved otherwise. There it was, under a torn envelope on the kitchen counter, Jasper's name printed cleanly at the top. The aroma of burgers grilling floated in from the porch, blending with the cicadas' drone and the soft twang of the country playlist Uncle Vince refused to change. I had come inside for more napkins. That's when I noticed the envelope, partly hidden beneath a dish towel, the corner jutting out like it had been waiting for me to find it. I hadn't intended to snoop, but the words stared back at me. Holloway Family Education Fund. I scanned down, and there it was, clear as daylight, $78,000 sent to Jasper's tuition account at Washburn. My breath caught. I grabbed the counter, kneading the wood beneath my palm to stay upright. Suddenly, I was back in that fall after high school, walking away from my spot at Mizzou because Mom said money was tight. I hadn't protested. I said I understood. I picked up 3 jobs and kept going. The time I asked for $300 for textbooks, she looked pained and said, "Honey, we just can't stretch that far." But they'd stretched it for him. My pulse was thudding in my ears when I heard the back door creak open. Ruth stepped in, wiping her hands on a dish towel, smiling like nothing had changed, until she noticed the paper in my hand. That smile dropped. "Nadine," she began gently, "he needed it more. You've always been so strong." I didn't reply. I slipped the document back into the envelope like it was fragile. I set it down beside the mustard bottle, turned, and walked to the sliding door without meeting her eyes. Outside, laughter echoed, glasses clinked, and chairs scraped the patio. I stepped into the fading light, blinking. Jasper was bragging about his new place, balcony, washer-dryer. Mom joined him, laughing too loud. I passed them both and made my way to the oak tree by the fence, the one I used to read under when I was 15. I rested my hand on its bark, silent, steady. When I looked back, Ruth stood at the kitchen window. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. I walked inside again, slower this time. The last rays of light stretched across the floor. Ruth stood still, almost uncertain. I asked one question, softly but clearly. "Was there ever a fund for me?" She replied, "You were always so capable. We didn't think you needed help." They always assumed I'd keep giving. But that night, I sat down to figure out exactly what I had given and what it had cost me. Rain started not long after I got home. A steady Missouri storm crept over the skyline, tapping against my windows while I slipped off my cardigan and sat down at the dining table, still in my jeans from the BBQ. The apartment smelled faintly of cooled tea and the stack of manila folders I'd left untouched. I reopened a spreadsheet I hadn't looked at since April. It didn't take long. Line after line of quiet generosity glowed back at me. $3,200 in taxes for the lake house, $800 for new gutters. Smaller ones, $150, $400. Groceries when Dad was laid up, gas money when Jasper was interning in Kansas City, HOA fees that nobody else even acknowledged. I did the math, listening to thunder roll through the city. $37,962.88. I stared at the total, heart heavy. They had told me, year after year, there wasn't money to help with my education. Yet somehow, I had managed to bankroll nearly every need that arose. And what did I get? Mom's sweet voice saying, "You're good with money, honey." Like that was enough. I dug through a folder called Estate Stuff and clicked open the lake house deed Grandpa had left with Mom. Expecting to see her and Dad's names only, I nearly dropped my mouse when I spotted mine. Co-owners: Gregory Holloway, Ruth Holloway, Nadine Holloway. My name, on the deed. Not as backup, not conditional, full co-owner. No one had ever told me. Then came a soft knock. Mr. Reuben Bell stood there, cardigan loose on his shoulders. "Sorry to bother you," he rasped. "Been out with pneumonia, behind on rent." He looked ashamed. "You don't need to worry, Mr. Bell," I told him. "We'll figure it out." Relief spread across his face. "Thank you. That means more than you know." After he left, I typed Lake Ozark's property value into Zillow. Modest lots, ours included, hovered around $200,000. My share? $44,000, maybe more. I whispered to no one, "This land is mine too." A new email pinged. Subject, reminder body, property tax due Friday. Can you send it by Thursday? I clicked archive. It's a real disappointment to realize that you are just a payer for family problems without being respected, isn't it? If you sympathize with me, please leave a comment number 9 in the comment section below. Now let's move on to the next development of this story. I once gave Mr. Bell a break on his rent. As it turns out, he knew more about property law than anyone I'd ever encountered. That Sunday brought a soft breeze that didn't cut the heat, but at least made it more bearable. I had intended to spend the afternoon reviewing market trends, but Reuben knocked at my door around 2, carrying a chipped ceramic mug and a thin manila folder. "I made cinnamon tea," he offered. "Old recipe. Thought you might want some company." His apartment had a scent that was part dust, part books, and just a trace of lavender. Newspapers were tied in careful bundles near the wall, and shelves were lined with jars of buttons, rubber bands, and pennies. It looked chaotic, but everything had its place. "You keep good records," he said, glancing at the folder I'd brought. It held the deed, years of tax receipts, and copies of everything I'd compiled the night before. "I didn't know what else to do," I admitted. "I've been paying into this for so long, but no one ever told me I was part owner." Reuben placed his tea aside and reached under his bookshelf, pulling out an old Missouri land law manual, well-worn and brimming with yellow tabs. "I used to do some real estate appraisal, mostly out by Versailles. I'm retired now, mostly." I blinked. "You were an appraiser?" He smiled kindly. "Before arthritis slowed me down. Most folks in this building never looked twice. You were one of the few who said hello with words, and not just a nod." I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled back. He examined the deed closely, adjusting his glasses. "Co-ownership, joint tenancy. You're within your rights to sell, Nadine. This isn't ceremonial, it's legal." The tension inside me loosened, like I'd finally surfaced after holding my breath too long. They always made it feel like I was just the helper, like it made sense that I'd shoulder the hard stuff. "They took advantage," he said plainly. "It happens more often than people admit." He helped me draft a letter of intent. Nothing binding, just a start. "It doesn't mean you'll sell," he explained, "but it gives you leverage. Paperwork changes the way people look at you." By the time I left, the sun had already dropped behind the rooftops. The unsigned letter rested in my hand. Still only potential, but real. I sat in my car, windows down, the sky fading to gold. Then I picked up my phone and called. "Hi," I said to the woman who answered. "This is Nadine Holloway. I'd like to schedule a property valuation." The knock was gentle, but my heart thundered. For the first time, I was doing something that didn't require permission. Just past 9, Mr. Garrison arrived. His truck's tailgate was rusted, a yellow thermos rolling in the cup holder. He stepped out in pressed jeans and a worn vest, calm as someone who'd seen storms and stayed standing. "Ms. Holloway?" he asked, offering a firm handshake. "I'm Garrison. Thanks for being prompt." We walked the edge of the property together. The grass was still wet from last night's rain, and the dock groaned slightly as the lake shifted beneath it. I hadn't been out there in months, maybe years, and the place hadn't changed much. Same peeling paint on the shed door, same creaking wind chime Grandpa had hung decades ago. Mr. Garrison asked the usual questions: square footage, repairs, access road conditions. I answered, voice steady, even when he said, "Seems like this place was loved once." Loved? Maybe. Used? Definitely. I handed him a copy of my tax records. He flipped through them, slowly, nodding. "So you've paid the last 5 years' property tax yourself?" "Yes." "No one else chipped in?" "No." He looked up at me, eyes narrowed. "And your name's on the deed?" "Yes, sir." He let out a low whistle. "Well then, you've got more at stake than they've let on." As he walked the perimeter with his measuring wheel, I stood near the tree where Jasper and I built our old tree house. The planks were long gone, but I remembered nailing them together with Grandpa's hammer, pretending we were architects. Ruth had packed us peanut butter sandwiches and sweet tea that day. I hadn't thought of that memory in years. By the time we circled back to the driveway, Mr. Garrison had a number in mind. Given current demand, I'd say this whole parcel could go for close to $90,000. Your half would fetch around $44,000. I nodded, barely trusting myself to speak. He handed me a sealed envelope and a pen. "That's the valuation and letter of intent. Don't commit to anything unless you sign." He tipped his hat. "Take your time." After he left, I sat on the edge of my car trunk with my legs dangling, the wind from the lake brushing past my face. I opened the envelope. Inside, the papers looked sterile. Black ink, clean lines, legal language. But they felt like something else, something sharp, something of mine. I uncapped my pen. My hand shook for a moment. Then I signed. Before leaving, I murmured to myself, "This time, I'm choosing me." The text read, "Come tonight. We need to talk. No please, no love, just pressure." I parked in front of the house just after 6. The porch light was already on, though it was still light out. I could see silhouettes moving behind the curtains, Mom, pacing, Jasper, seated stiffly, and Uncle Vince, arms folded like he was holding back a sigh. When I walked in, no one greeted me. The room was too quiet for a house with 4 people. The only sound was the hum of the ceiling fan and the slow tick of the wall clock. Ruth finally broke the silence. "We heard you're selling the land." I took a slow breath and set my folder down on the coffee table. "I had it appraised. My share is worth $44,000. She blinked. "You're just going to sell it? After all this family's been through?" "After everything I've paid for?" I said calmly. "Yes, I am." Jasper leaned forward, confusion on his face. "Wait, you paid for what?" I opened the folder and handed him a page. 5 years of taxes, repairs, HOA dues, the roof, the new water heater, while Mom told me they couldn't afford to help me through college. Ruth shook her head. That money was meant for the family. You were always the stable one." "No, I was always the invisible one," I said. "Stable was just the label you gave me so you could keep asking." Jasper looked at the numbers, his eyes widening. "I didn't know. I just thought you made more, that you liked helping." "No one asked if I could," I said. "Only if I would." Uncle Vince cleared his throat. "Well," he said, glancing through the documents, "she's right. Her name's on the deed. She's well within her rights." Ruth turned to him, stunned. "Vince, this is family land." "And she's family," he said gently. "Just one you haven't listened to." I looked at Mom. She didn't speak. Her hands were clenched tightly in her lap. "You said you were proud of how independent I was," I continued. "But what you meant was that I didn't cost you anything." She flinched, just barely. Jasper set the paper down. "I'm sorry," he said, not looking up. "I didn't know it was this bad." "It's okay," I said. "You weren't the one hiding it." Ruth's voice cracked. "You're tearing this family apart." I stood and picked up my folder. Number I'm just refusing to be the glue anymore. I walked to the door. No one followed. I pick up my bag and walk out. Behind me, no one calls me back. 3 days later, I open the door to find Mr. Bell, not with papers, but with a homemade peach pie. He held the pie like it might break in his hands. The crust sagged slightly in the center, uneven and golden, but the aroma that followed, cinnamon, melted butter, ripe peaches, settled over my nerves like an old, familiar quilt. "I figured this might say more than a thank you card," he said. I stepped aside with a smile. "You didn't have to do that." "No," he replied, easing toward the kitchen table. "But I wanted to." He placed the pie down with quiet care, taking the same chair he always used when we talked finance. This time, though, there was no folder, no pen, just a folded linen napkin he pulled from his coat. "This was my wife's recipe. I haven't made it since she passed." While he sliced the pie, I set out 2 forks and made tea. The first bites were silent. Sweet, soft, maybe too sugary, but somehow just right. Maybe it wasn't about the taste. "She used to say peaches were for endings," Reuben murmured, gazing through the window. "End of summer, end of canning season. It always felt like saying goodbye." I nodded. "I think this is an ending for me too, but a good one." He turned to me. "You did right by yourself, Nadine. Not many people find the courage to say no after saying yes for so long." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I handed him a receipt. $43,900, newly deposited into a savings account I'd called mine. It wasn't everything I gave up, but it was something. Reuben raised his mug. "Here's to women who pay attention and finally get paid back." We clinked mugs and talked a while longer. Then I saw him at the door. "Next summer," I said, "I might buy a porch swing." "Make sure it faces west," he smiled. "Best place to catch the light." Then he walked down the steps slowly, a pie tin tucked under his arm, and I stood in the doorway, watching until he disappeared around the corner. There's strength in doing the unexpected, not to hurt, but to heal. In the end, it wasn't family who truly saw me, but the quiet man I'd once helped without hesitation. Kindness, when freely given, often returns, sometimes in cinnamon and peach. If this story meant something to you, pause today and truly notice someone you might have overlooked. The gentlest hearts rarely shout, but they carry the words we most need to hear, if we're willing to listen.